There's a truck on the interstate doing 5 miles an hour, hazards blinking, 80,000 pounds of freight crawling toward an off-ramp it might not reach before the traffic stacks up behind it. And the part that should bother you is this: nothing is wrong with the engine. The engine pulls clean. It's the system bolted around the engine that decided the driver had to be stopped. A few hundred miles away, in a shop with the bay doors rolled up, another man is spending real money rebuilding a diesel older than the truck it's going back into. He could buy new off a lot this week. He won't. Ask him why, and he won't say nostalgia. He'll say he ran the numbers, and the numbers say the old iron wins. The engines these men fight over have names that mean nothing to anyone who never turned a wrench. The Cummins N14, the Detroit Series 60, and the one a man will pay a premium for sight unseen, a Caterpillar C15 with 3 characters stamped into the block, 6NZ. Change those 3 characters to MBN, and the men who know will warn you off it. We'll get to how one became treasure and the other a warning. But none of it makes sense until you know where the breed came from. And that starts with a company that bet its whole existence on a single idea. In the mid-1960s, Mack Trucks was in trouble. Bleeding money in Allentown, losing ground to Cummins and Detroit. So they did the thing companies only do when they're cornered. They bet the future of the whole business on one engine, dropped into the brand new R model, the Maxidyne. The idea was torque rise, and to see why it mattered, look at how a truck engine worked then. Standard diesels made their power high and narrow. Climb a grade, and the revs fell off and the torque fell off with them, so you were forever rowing through the gearbox chasing the band. Those engines had a torque rise of maybe 15 to 20%. The Maxidyne delivered 52% more torque down at the bottom than it made at peak horsepower, a flat, stubborn band of pull from around 1200 RPM to 2100. It held grades where the others surrendered. That changed the truck around it. With power that flat, you didn't need 10 or 13 gears to keep the engine happy. You could run a simple 5-speed and let the torque do the work. The rest of the industry noticed. Cummins, Caterpillar, and Detroit all reached the same conclusion, that their high RPM formula was wrong, and spent the next decade building their own versions. Cummins was blunt enough to call theirs custom torque. The low-revving, high-torque diesel every driver here came to respect. Mack wrote that rulebook first, and everyone else copied the homework. Then, in 1973, the ground moved under all of them. The oil crisis hit, and almost overnight, horsepower stopped being the thing that sold an engine. Fuel economy was everything now. Cummins' answer was the 855 Big Cam, and the name is as literal as it sounds. The camshaft measured 2.5 inches across, where the old one was 2. That bigger cam let injection happen over a shorter window, and a shorter window meant cleaner, more efficient combustion. Here's the part the horsepower crowd never likes to hear. The Big Cam was the first engine designed to meet the emissions limits written into the Clean Air Act of 1976. The million-mile legend they worship was built to chase mileage and satisfy regulators, and became immortal as a side effect. It also saved Cummins from 29% of the big rig market in 1975 to 63% by 1983. And it was one of the last heavy diesels a man could pull apart and set right with hand tools and a manual. No laptop, no codes, nothing watching over his shoulder. That was about to change. While Cummins was climbing, Detroit diesel was going straight down. By the early 80s, it was a dying division inside General Motors. One of their own people later admitted plainly that the company had been letting bad product out the door. And GM treated it that way. Of the $50 billion the corporation spent modernizing plants that decade, the diesel division got $100 million. A rounding error. 2 things pulled it out of the grave. On January 1, 1988, a race car driver named Roger Penske partnered with GM took 60% ownership and put himself in the CEO's chair. And the year before, Detroit had gambled on an engine that betrayed everything it was known for. Detroit built screaming two-strokes, had for generations. The 1987 Series 60 was a clean-sheet four-stroke. It was also the first heavy-duty diesel with fully integrated electronic controls. The turnaround was violent. On-highway share climbed from 3% to 33%. But those electronics did something nobody mentioned at the dealership. For the first time, the engine watched the driver. The control system could log overspeeding, excessive idle, hard braking, and hand the owner a record of how his man drove out on the road where the boss had never been able to see. Every piece of fleet telematics that came after traces back to that box. This is the hinge the whole story turns on. The moment the American diesel stopped being purely mechanical and started keeping notes. Which brings us to the part that never made it onto a single brochure. On October 22, 1998, the Justice Department and the EPA announced the largest civil penalty for an environmental violation in the country's history to that point, $83.4 million, and 7 engine makers agreed to spend more than $1 billion to make the case go away. Caterpillar, Cummins, Detroit Diesel, Mack, Navistar, Renault, Volvo. Together, 95% of every heavy-duty diesel engine sold in America. The charge, since the early 90s, their engines ran software that quietly switched into a more fuel-efficient, higher pollution mode once the truck settled into a long, steady cruise. The EPA called it a defeat device. Sit with that because it's the whole irony of the era in one line. The thing every driver loved, that extra mileage once you got rolling and held it, was the exact thing the government called cheating. It settled as a civil matter, nobody formally admitted guilt, and the engineering question was genuinely contested. But the consequence was concrete. The makers had to meet the 2004 emission standards early, by October 1, 2002, and a federal court refused to give Caterpillar and Detroit Diesel more time. So when you feel in your gut that a pre-2002 engine is a fundamentally different animal, you're not imagining it. It was built in a freer era by companies that had just been caught and fined. Caterpillar took the hardest fall, and almost everyone misremembers it. Cat didn't limp out of the truck business as an also-ran. It walked away from first place. In 2006, Caterpillar was the Class 8 market leader, 81,000 new engines, just under 30% of the market ahead of Cummins. Then came a second fine, separate from the first and rarely mentioned, $128 million for engines sold in late 2002 and 2003 that didn't meet the new standards. The on-highway business kept shrinking until it was about 8% of everything Caterpillar built. In 2010, the company that had been number one simply quit. And here, one engine splits into two legends. The C15, built right before the deadline closed in, the 6NZ, became the one men hunt for, the prefix they'll pay over the odds for because they know exactly what era it came from. The C15 built during the scramble to comply, the MBN, got its own name in the shops, the bridge motor, because it bridged the old mechanical C15 to the new electronic version, and it earned a reputation mechanics still trade warnings about. Same model. The difference is 3 characters on a serial plate, and it's the gap between arguably the most sought-after Class 8 engine on the planet and the one men tell each other to avoid. That's not sentiment. That's an emissions deadline turned into metal. All of which finally answers the man in the open-door shop, putting good money into an old block instead of buying new. The pre-emissions engines were designed to be rebuilt, taken down to bare iron and brought back for a second life, a third, a fourth. What came after 2007 was built the other way around. The emissions stack bolted to it. The EGR, the particulate filter, the DEF system. fails in ways the engine never does. The EGR cooks coolant where it doesn't belong. The filter forces regeneration cycles that strand a truck mid-haul, and a replacement runs $2,500 to $5,000 and up at a dealer. And the DEF system, when it faults, worst in the cold, worst on a hard idling truck, drops that truck into a derate limited to as low as 5 miles an hour. Which is where this started. A healthy engine, a full load, and a system that stopped the truck anyway. The man rebuilding the N14 isn't hiding from the future. He looked straight at it and chose the simpler machine, the one with nothing bolted to it that costs more than the engine and breaks long before the engine ever will.